Welcome to the Deep Dive Learner. So I want you to think about your absolute oldest childhood memory for a second. Just, try to picture it in your head.
It's usually something pretty fragmented, right?
Yeah, exactly. But what if I told you that memory is, functionally speaking, completely fake?
Which is such a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. I mean, we tend to think of our personal history as this, like a filing cabinet. You close your eyes, open a drawer, and pull out a permanent, fixed photograph of what happened.
Right, like it's safely stored away.
Exactly. But neuroscience tells us it's actually much more like saving a Word document. Every single time you open a memory and feel a new notion about it, your brain clicks Save As and overwrites the original file.
And eventually that original file is just gone entirely.
It's gone.
Which is a terrifying thought when you realize how much of your identity is built on those files. You assume you are the sum of your experiences, but, well, you're actually just the sum of the edits you've made to those experiences over decades.
Yeah. And that tension, that gap between what actually happened and what we tell ourselves happened is exactly the mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring the elusive nature of memory, identity, and the stories we invent just to survive.
Such a rich topic.
It really is. And our guide for this is this brilliant one-act play by Farid Novin titled The Manuscript of ISMAIL.
And it's a fascinating piece of source material, especially when you look at how people are actually discovering it.
Oh yeah, the format is so unique.
Right. It wasn't handed down in some leather-bound script at an elite theater festival. It was published on March 23, 2026, on a digital blog titled Plays and Philosophy.
That is honestly one of my favorite details about this whole thing. You load up the page to read this heavy existential masterpiece, and right there next to the text is that classic retro orange blogger logo.
Yeah, the contrast is amazing.
Totally. There's a little post-a-comment box at the bottom. It says incredibly modern, everyday digital wrapper around a piece of art that wrestles with, the most timeless human questions.
It makes it feel so accessible.
It does. And Novin drops the play's central thesis right on page 1. It's the hook that immediately grabbed me. He writes, "Memory is not a photograph. It is a manuscript rewritten every time it is read."
Such a powerful line.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Novin doesn't just, state this idea in the dialogue. He physically stages it.
He does, and the way he stages this fragmentation of the human ego is just brilliant. I mean, he abandons naturalism entirely.
Right.
When the lights come up, there aren't traditional characters sitting around in a living room. There are 6 men on stage. And the stage directions explicitly state that these men must be physically identical in age, height, and build.
But they represent just one man.
Exactly. ISMAIL Nicknam. They are divided into 6 15-year intervals of his life, spanning from age 1 all the way to 90.
So you have the 15-year-old ISMAIL, the 45-year-old ISMAIL, the 9-year-old ISMAIL, all physically occupying the exact same space at the exact same time.
Yes, and it is chaotic. They're interrupting each other, contradicting each other's memories.
And sometimes just falling into these stunned silences.
Right.
The first analogy that comes to my mind is a set of Russian nesting dolls. But instead of fitting neatly and safely inside one another, they're all sitting in a circle, arguing bitterly about who the real doll is.
That's a perfect way to visualize it, because they aren't looking at their life as a progression. They are actively fighting for narrative control.
Yeah.
And what fuels that fight is the fact that they are not alone on stage. Positioned upstage, slightly elevated at a desk, is a character simply called the Examiner.
Right. She's a woman of indeterminate age, and she is just there before the audience even enters the theater. She just sits there.
Completely still.
Yeah, she doesn't explain herself, she doesn't smile, she doesn't frown. Absolute silence. The narrator hints she might represent the women in ISMAIL's life, or maybe history itself, or, perhaps just the audience judging him.
And what's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism Novin is exploiting. Her absolute silence acts as the most dominating presence in the room.
Oh.
In psychology, when an authority figure offers 0 feedback, it creates this intense vacuum, and people will desperately try to fill that vacuum to relieve their anxiety.
Because they can't stand the silence.
Exactly. She forces these 6 ISMAILs into a state of deep discomfort because they know they are being evaluated, but they don't know the criteria.
So they just start babbling.
Right. They start speaking the way any of us speak when we're trying to impress a silent judge. They attempt to tell the truth, but they simultaneously try to make themselves look good.
Which are 2 goals that almost never coexist peacefully.
Not at all.
It makes you wonder, learner, If we split your life or my life into 15-year chunks and put them in a room with a silent judge, would those versions of us even recognize each other?
Let alone agree on a core life story.
Right? Would they even agree?
The play suggests they absolutely wouldn't, and Novin proves this in Scene Y, titled The Well. He centers the action around this defining traumatic incident from Ismail's early childhood.
Yeah, 3 years old.
Right. Little Ismail wanders out to an old kitchen, climbs the stone lip of a well, and falls in.
But he gets lucky. I mean, incredibly lucky. He doesn't hit the water at the bottom. He lands perfectly inside the wooden bucket tied to the rope.
So he's just sitting there in the dark, swinging.
Exactly.
But the objective reality of a boy sitting in a bucket quickly vanishes. What we get instead is this Rashomon-style memory. The play presents 3 conflicting family myths that grow out of this single afternoon.
3 totally different versions.
First, we get the mother's version. Her narrative focuses entirely on sheer terror and near tragedy. She wakes up, finds the bed empty, and is so paralyzed by fear she can't even force herself to look in the kitchen. She's convinced her child is already dead.
Wow. And then you have the uncle's version,
Yeah.
which is totally different. He's the one who actually goes into the kitchen, and his story is basically a pure action movie.
He makes himself the star.
Right? He focuses on his heroic rescue, pulling the heavy rope up hand over hand, burning his palms, silently carrying the boy to safety.
And then finally, the father's version takes a wild left turn into theology.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Right, because the father had previously refused a friend's advice to wall off the well, claiming God would protect his house.
So his ego is on the line.
Completely. So when Ismail falls and happens to land in the bucket, the father views this not as a near-fatal accident, but as absolute proof of his own religious righteousness.
Like God caught the boy specifically to prove the father right.
Exactly. Notice how none of those narratives actually leave room for Ismail to just be a curious 3-year-old who made a clumsy mistake.
Wait, I struggle with this a bit, though. When we talk about these family members telling these stories over the years, are we saying these parents are maliciously lying to manipulate their kid? Or do they actually genuinely believe their own versions of the well story by the time he's an adult?
It's the latter, absolutely. And that's where the concept of cognitive dissonance comes in.
Okay, right.
The brain cannot handle the psychological stress of holding 2 contradictory ideas, like, I am a good parent and my negligence almost killed my child.
That would just break you.
Exactly.
Right.
To resolve that stress, the brain literally alters the memory synapses to protect the ego. The mother needs the near tragedy to justify the overwhelming, irrational fear she felt.
And the uncle needs the rescue narrative to feel heroic and valuable to the family.
Right. And the father needs divine intervention to mask his own negligence. Over decades of retelling, their brains have clicked, as so many times that the objective truth has been completely overwritten by the myth.
That is wild. Meanwhile, the only thing Ismail himself actually remembers is crying in the dark.
Just a raw sensory memory.
Yeah. And because of this event, he develops a lifelong visceral discomfort whenever he is near the mouths of deep things, but his actual memory is just buried under his family's baggage.
It really is.
It begs the question, does the objective truth of the fall even matter? I mean, if you're told all your life that God literally reached down and saved you in a bucket, that narrative is going to shape your psychological reality and your ego just as much as gravity does.
Oh, it becomes the fundamental architecture of your identity. You build your understanding of the world around the myths you inherit.
Yeah.
But eventually, those inherited protective myths have to collide with the harsh realities of the outside world. And for Ismail, that collision happens against the backdrop of massive political upheaval in Iran.
Right. Now, Nuvin drops Ismail into the middle of some very real, incredibly turbulent history here. Specifically, the 1953 coup that overthrew Prime Minister Mossag, and later, the Shah's 1975 mandate forcing citizens to join a single-state political party.
It's a heavy backdrop.
It is. And just a quick note for you, learner, our goal here isn't to litigate that history or take a political stance. We are impartially reporting the historical events and Ismail's fictionalized experience of them exactly as written in the source material, without endorsing any political viewpoints regarding the Iranian government, the Shah, or the 1979 revolution that followed.
Exactly. We are just looking at these events strictly through the lens of Novin's script to understand how massive political shockwaves can shatter a single person's identity.
Well said. Because Ismail doesn't process these events as a historian.
No, he processes them as a child, insulated by privilege. Following the 1953 coup, Ismail's father rises in the new power structure to become a commanding army colonel.
And this completely warps Ismail's reality.
It distorts everything.
The details Novin uses to illustrate this are just brilliant. Ismail suddenly starts getting unearned good grades from teachers who were terrified of his father's rank.
Right, he's basically untouchable.
Yeah, he gets chauffeured to school by a commissioned military driver, and he just absorbs this privilege like a sponge.
As any kid would.
Right. But then reality snaps back.
Huh.
A poor boy at school. This kid wearing shoes that are worn completely through and patched together with scrap leather. He calls Ismail out.
He confronts him.
He tells him directly, if your father weren't a colonel, you would have failed your exams.
And Ismail reacts the way any threatened ego does, with defensive anger. He curses the boy.
And the poorer boy responds by slapping Ismail across the ear so hard that it rings for the rest of the day.
The aftermath of this is chilling, though.
It really is. The next morning, Ismail complains to his military driver.
And the driver doesn't yell. He doesn't hit the poor boy.
No, he just calmly calls him over, mentions that he heard about the slap, and inflicts a punishment rooted entirely in structural power.
It's so systemic.
Yeah, he forces the poor boy to look at his worn-out, heavily repaired shoes, slowly take them off, leave them by the side of the road, and walk away barefoot.
It's a devastating scene. It strips the poor boy of his dignity and highlights the raw, unearned power of Ismail's family.
And the older Ismails on stage are deeply unsettled by this memory.
They instinctively look up to the silent examiner, practically begging her for some kind of validation or absolution.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The older versions of Ismail start fiercely debating his internal reaction to that exact moment.
The feelings behind it.
Yeah. The middle-aged Ismail IV insists it was shame. I was feeling shame. But the younger Ismail II pushes back. He says, I was not ready to call it that yet.
That is such a profound admission.
Isn't it?
It gets to the core of moral development. Children experience complex emotions before they possess the vocabulary to define them.
That makes a lot of sense.
The physical sensation of guilt was there, but the younger Ismail lacked the moral framework to identify his own complicity in that injustice. He wasn't ready to admit he was the villain in someone else's story.
Think about that universal moment as a kid or a teenager when you first realize a friend had less money than you or less safety than you.
It hits hard.
It does. That retroactive guilt hits you years later when you finally understand the context. And significantly, the moment younger Ismail wrestles with this lack of vocabulary, the play gives us a crucial physical action.
Oh, this is the best part.
It's the one and only time the examiner moves with intention. She looks down and writes something on her paper. We never see what it is, but the timing is undeniable. The moment Ismail actively wrestles with his unearned privilege and the pain it caused, the universe takes a note.
It's a heavy realization, for sure. But Novin is a master of pacing, so he doesn't leave the audience drowning in that heavy register.
Thank goodness.
Right. As the play moves into Scene the Third, the tone shifts into the sheer, hilarious absurdity of youth.
Oh, I love this scene.
We watch Ismail try to navigate romance and philosophy, and he gets both of them spectacularly wrong.
Young Ismail decides that true love requires total, literal self-sacrifice.
Just completely giving himself away.
Exactly. So to prove his devotion, he just starts giving away his most prized possessions to any girl he develops a crush on. He hands over his stamp collection, his foreign coins, his absolute best glass marbles.
He genuinely believes the act of emptying himself out is what makes him lovable.
But then he goes to university, outgrows the marbles, and discovers existentialism.
Naturally.
Yeah, he spends his nights reading Kant, Hegel, Sartre, and Camus.
And he forms this hilariously flawed hypothesis that his ability to deconstruct reality and brood over the meaninglessness of existence is going to make him utterly irresistible to wealthy women.
Right, and he learns the hard way that those women couldn't care less about his lectures on Kant's categorical imperative.
They really didn't.
No, they just wanted boys who rode motorcycles. Or at the very least, boys who possessed some basic, reliable certainty about who they were. Ismail literally admits on stage that memorizing Sartre was just the intellectual equivalent of giving away his marbles.
It provides great comedic relief, but Novin uses it to set up a massive pivot.
Because it doesn't stay funny for long.
No, because this youthful grasping for an identity eventually hardens into a desperate need for certainty. And that certainty is put to the ultimate test in 1975, when the Shah demands that every citizen formally join the state's resurgence party.
And the alternative is to take your passport and leave Iran.
Right. At this point, Ismail is 29. He's already seen his peers arrested for writing the wrong poetry or asking the wrong questions.
So he realizes this mandate isn't just politics, it's a state-enforced identity. So he refuses.
He packs a suitcase, leaves his homeland, and leaves behind a close poet friend who is later executed.
Oh.
And Ismail II, the 29-year-old version who makes the choice, proudly declares that he left with the absolute certainty that only the young possess. He believed that drawing a line in the sand and leaving was a clean, pure break.
But how does the brain actually process that kind of sudden exile? And we have this romantic trope of the wise exile, the person who leaves their homeland and gains ultimate perspective.
Like they've ascended somehow.
Exactly. But Ishmael completely challenges that. As he ages, he realizes that certainty isn't a shield, it's just really heavy luggage.
It exhausts you and you can't put it down.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of memory and psychology, the older Ismail makes a heartbreaking observation about the mechanics of exile. Because he physically left Iran at age 29, his sensory input was cut off.
His brain literally cannot update its mental models of his homeland.
Exactly. So he carries around a frozen narrative. The country in his head is permanently 29 years old. A fictional landscape filled with the coffeehouse arguments of his youth and friends who haven't yet been executed.
That blew my mind. He admits that during the massive upheaval of the 1979 revolution, he was an absent man.
He watched it on television from the outside.
Right. He realizes that his only true authority as an exile is the deeply uncomfortable ability to say, I do not know. It makes me wonder, learner, is mourning a homeland sometimes just a disguised way of mourning your own lost youth?
That's a profound way to look at it.
Because the place he left doesn't exist anymore, but neither does the person he was when he left it.
Exactly. And that realization triggers an existential collapse for the older Ismails. The heavy luggage of certainty finally breaks them. The oldest versions begin to doubt everything they thought was concrete.
It all just unravels.
Ismail starts wondering if his memory of his father's voice is even real, or if he's just hearing his own 30-year auditory rewrote of that voice.
He questions if his major life events, like ending a marriage or moving to a new city, were actually deliberate choices or just blind accidents that he retroactively labeled as choices so his ego could feel in control.
Retrospect is supposed to be a mercy, but here it becomes a cruelty.
Yeah, but eventually this absolute certainty he built to protect himself becomes its own kind of prison. And that forces a breaking point in his later years where he has to stop debating his alternate selves and start apologizing.
Which brings us to scene 6, Letters Never Sent. It's the most vulnerable sequence in the play. The 6 Ismails stop trying to impress the examiner and start addressing unseen figures in their lives.
They offer the advice they desperately wish they could have given or received.
Right. The youngest Ismail tells his future self that being frightened isn't a moral failure. Fear is just biological information, and you have to learn to read it without letting it control you.
Such good advice. And another version speaks to his father, finally admitting that despite spending a lifetime trying to be his exact opposite, they ended up remarkably similar.
But the confession that hit me the hardest is about the nature of regret.
Oh, yes.
Ismail realizes that his biggest regrets aren't actually his massive dramatic failures. The massive failures were instructive. They forced him to change.
His true regrets are his small refusals.
Exactly. It's the moment he didn't offer a kind word when someone needed it. It's the drafted letter of apology he chose to throw away instead of sending.
He beautifully refers to these small refusals as the locked rooms inside himself. And the 90-year-old Ismail simply accepts that he is running out of time to unlock them. But the house is still standing.
And as they let go of these unsent letters, they finally turn inward for the ultimate confrontation. After an hour of arguing over who is the real Ismail, they reach a startling conclusion.
They aren't bound together by a continuous, stable personality.
The self is an illusion. What binds these 6 men together is entirely structural. They share a failing physical body. They share the same legal name on official documents.
And they share the ghosts. The memory of the bucket in the well, the barefoot boy walking away in the dust, the murdered poet.
All those fragments.
The older Ismails realized that by the time they were intellectually mature enough to evaluate these foundational stories, they had already been entirely shaped by them. You cannot objectively examine the mold after you've already been poured into it.
So true.
So what does this all mean? How do you resolve a manuscript made of fragmented, completely contradictory drafts?
The profound resolution comes from the one part of him that hasn't learned how to edit memories yet.
The youngest one.
Right. The 7-year-old Ismail looks up at the silent examiner. He has the completely unpretentious, clear gaze of a child. He admits he doesn't understand half of the philosophical debates the older men are having.
But he looks at the 90-year-old, the 45-year-old, and he just concludes, I think you are all very tired.
And that simple, observant truth breaks the tension.
It really does. The stage directions note that for just a fraction of a second, the examiner's face finally softens. Her only reaction in the entire play is to validate the raw, exhausting weight of adult overanalysis.
And the older Ismails hear the child, they see her soften, and they agree.
Yes, we're tired. Something in them finally puts the luggage down.
It's a gorgeous synthesis. Novin is showing us that a human life simply doesn't average out. You can't take the boy who fell in a well, the teenager who gave away his marbles, and the man who fled his country, and mathematically deduce a single identity.
The self isn't a noun moving neatly forward in time. It is a verb. It's a constantly ongoing, unresolved negotiation.
A negotiation between the versions of us that survive, the versions we lose to time, and the fictions our brain invents just to make the plot make sense.
And at the close of the play, the Ismails aren't fighting for narrative control anymore. They have arrived at a shared silence.
And in that silence, Ismail remembers the well one last time. But he doesn't remember the mother's fear, the uncle's heroism, or the father's theology.
He strips away the edits.
Yes. He just remembers the physical, sensory truth of the moment, the gentle swaying of the wooden bucket, and the earthy, wet smell of the rope. He realizes he wasn't terrified in the dark. He was just a child, waiting to see what would happen next.
Then the lighting shifts to a deep dusk. The examiner, after sitting in judgment of this entire messy, rewritten life, calmly gathers her papers.
She stands up.
And she walks off stage through a dark door, leaving the Ismails alone. The examination is over, but there's no final grade. There's no verdict, because there was never actually a trial to begin with.
It's a brilliant mirror. It forces the audience to think about the examiner sitting in the theater of their own mind. Who is the silent judge keeping score in your life?
That's the question I want to pass on to you, learner. Look at your own life. Think back to that filing cabinet of memories we talked about at the beginning. Which manuscript of memory are you currently reading?
And more importantly, who is actually clicking save as right now? Is it the truth? Is it the myths your parents handed you?
Or is it just your ego desperately rewriting the draft so you always look like the hero?
We all carry that heavy luggage of certainty to protect ourselves. But Farid Novin's play invites us to just put it down, to accept the locked rooms, the contradictory drafts, and the shared ghosts without needing them to make perfect logical sense.
It's a daunting challenge to look at the structural debts that built you. And usually, this is where we leave you with Novin's beautiful final quote. In the end, we are not the events that happen to us, but the narratives we choose to believe, and the narratives we are not yet brave enough to revise.
The events are just the bucket in the dark. The narrative is the reality you build out of it.
But I want to leave you with a different thought today, learner. If memory is just a manuscript we are constantly revising to survive, what happens when we finally put the pen down?
That's a scary thought.
It is. If you stop constantly re-editing your past to justify your present, what is left? Is it possible that the truest version of ourselves isn't found in the elaborate stories we leave behind, but in the quiet, unedited silence we eventually learn to accept? Take some time to think about that, and we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.